Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Monday, June 2nd, 2025. And for our Monday vlog, we deal with mathematics and statistics. And as some of you may know from yesterday's vlog, the theme this week is positive energy. So, is it possible then to quantify positive energy? Bit of a tricky proposition. So the simple answer would be no. Because energy is energy. It's how we use energy that determines whether we're using it in a positive or a negative way. And that's true, of course, if we're talking about energy as a physical property or something that's defined as the ability to do work or exert a force and, in terms of recognizable forms of heat and light. And we also know that, of course, in the physical universe, there are many different kinds of energy too, kinetic energy, potential energy, chemical energy, elastic energy, and so on. But can we talk about positive energy, though, in terms of people and their dispositions? Sure, we do it all the time. We often talk about somebody giving off positive energy, for example, or they have a positive or optimistic outlook. Of course, there's a subjective assessment that's involved there too, right? It's not something that can be objectively measured in the physical sense like joules and calories. But is it fair to say that some people have more positive energy? Others perhaps have more negative energy, or the balance can tip more in one direction than the other? I think so. But again, that requires more of a subjective assessment. So how could we possibly quantify positive energy? Well, I do think it's possible. Not exactly in the same sense or as directly as we would measure the quantity of physical energy. But before I actually did a little bit of research on the subject matter, I kind of did a bit of a thought experiment, and I was hypothesizing that we could, in fact, measure positive energy, I think, across three broad domains: behaviorally, attitudinally, and discursively. So, again, there's still a subjective, there's an interpretive component of all of this, but we couldn't, would we not be able to measure, for example, a range of different behaviors that people engage in that give off positive energy, such as how often they greet people with a smile or how often they hug one another? Or attitudinally, in terms of their levels of optimism, for example? Or discursively, in terms of how often they offer positive assessments or words of encouragement. So in short, I think we all have a sense of people and even ourselves in terms of when we're giving off positive energy. And those evaluations, however subjective, are still somehow rooted in our observations and our judgments of what people are doing and how they are in general, that sort of thing. So could we not somehow translate all of that into observing in a quantifiable way a measure of positive energy? And it turns out, while exactly what I'm suggesting hasn't been done yet, there has been some work in the area. For example, measuring subjective vitality. What is that? Well, that's defined as the state of feeling alive and having positive emotions. A more detailed definition would be the energy perceived to emanate from the self, with an internal locus of causality, and reflecting the idea of a person being functioning at an optimal level and being self-realized. So there's a self-appraisal aspect where people can talk about how much energy they have, how much enthusiasm, how much aliveness they're experiencing. And that's actually been done. And conversely, we can measure the extent to which people report feeling depleted or irritable, exhausted, or depressed. So it turns out that, as expected, those who convey higher levels of vitality and positive energy, as measured by certain scales, also score higher in terms of their psychological well-being. So we have some positive energy evidence, however indirect or imperfect that might be. In China, then, in the context of COVID-19, researchers studied more than 6 million online expressions of different emotions that people were conveying on social media platforms, including one that was labeled positive energy. In effect, they were able to study the lexicon systematically of what people were saying online, and they were able to quantify positive emotional expressions in the Chinese language online. And while there were a range of different emotions, of course, that were expressed throughout the pandemic, what was most notable in this particular study was the amount of positive energy the researchers were able to document. And apparently, this positive energy was sustained throughout the pandemic. Mostly, apparently, or the researchers surmise, in response to the relatively rapid interventions that the Chinese government implemented, as well as the effective control of the pandemic, at least as evaluated by online users. Yes, there were also expressions of fear and sadness, which varied over time, but the meta theme of the research was the persistence of positive energy directed by the online community or netizens as a whole. And finally, can positive energy then affect your own health and well-being? Apparently, yes. So, for example, there's a study in Spain that examined the impact of mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR. It's a program for improving one's own well-being, relaxation states, and related positive emotions. The research team conducted a randomized controlled trial with a sample of 42 physicians whom they followed over the course of a full year. The intervention group participated in an 8-week MBSR program with an additional 10-month maintenance period. And they completed measures of mindfulness and relaxation at pre-intervention, post-intervention, and then again 10 months later. They also obtained heart rate measures over time as well. And what they found was that significant improvements favored the experimental group compared to the control group in terms of their measures of mindfulness and relaxation, including self-reported positive emotional energy states. That is, things like a greater sense of feeling at ease, a greater sense of peace, renewal, energy, optimism, happiness, acceptance, and even transcendence. And all of this was, all of these benefits accrued after merely the 8-week program. So it didn't take all that long to monitor and then assess actual, real, self-reported changes along those multiple dimensions. And even more remarkably was that the effect sizes, the changes in the magnitudes, significantly increased at the end of the maintenance period after a year, especially for mindfulness and positive energy. And additionally, heart rates were significantly decreased for the intervention group, and these were maintained even a year after treatment as well, after they went through the program. So these are really quite remarkable findings. But then finally, if you're interested in doing a PhD on the topic, I highly recommend doing what I suggested earlier in the vlog. That is to come up with ways to measure people's behavioral expressions of giving off or transferring positive energy through their interactions. I just think it'd be a fascinating study, behaviorally, to see what people do on a regular basis in real time. To do kind of a daily diary of their self-reported behaviors or some kind of an ethnographic study observing people in their natural environments and what they do on a regular basis. And then you could look at how often people, a range of different measures, how often they greet their neighbors and how often they smile and how they respond to traffic delays or situations, or how often do they engage in random acts of kindness, or How often do they express a general willingness to help out or go the extra mile? And so on. So there's a number of different ways you could measure, I think, positive energy from a behavioral standpoint. And in fact, if you have ideas specifically about how to do that, or what you think of when you think of people giving off positive energy, please share them in the comments below. Love to see them. You almost certainly have your own examples, your own experiences that perhaps you've placed in your mental filing cabinet, if you will, in your folder titled Positive Energy. I hope you have such a folder. And if you don't, why don't you create one in your mind and then take a few minutes to see what you might stick into that folder. Anyway, all right, so tomorrow then we're going to look at positive energy again, because that's the theme of the week, but we're going to look at it in the context of music and the arts. All right, so until then, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs and positive energy in abundance. Hope to see you then.